The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon. It's Patrick Bose with VPI. Welcome to today's training webcast on top 30 public safety best practices of 2014. We're very happy to have you with us, and we know your time is very valuable, and so we're going to try to give you as many great tips and best practices that you can take with you and start implementing in your communications center as early as tomorrow. So before we get started, just to avoid any accidental interruptions, everyone is on mute, so if you have any questions or comments, please use the question that's in the lower right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar panel there. And so if you have any questions, just feel free to ask them there. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can before the end of the allotted hour here. So just a little bit about the best practices forum that we put together in the last couple of years here, and we'll be continuing next year. In 2013, we visited 5 cities across the country, and in 2014, this past year, we visited 6 more cities, and you know, all the way from the Northwest down to the Southeast and throughout the country, and just have been gathering a lot of really great best practices. If you haven't been to one of these events, it's a super interactive forum where you know, we share what we've learned from all of you, and then we have a lot of interactive dialogue, town hall type of discussion about all things that are important to you. So this is a way to kind of, you know, supplement some of the annual conferences that you may have attended. It's kind of a nice way to network and meet other people or catch up with people who you don't always see throughout the year as well. So today's panelists, I'm joined by my colleagues Mark Fletcher from Avaya and Ken from Avtec, and they're both have tremendous public safety experience, and I'll let them tell you a little bit about themselves. Mark has been in public safety, formerly as a dispatcher for many years. He's an EMP. He hosts a weekly podcast on the Avaya network, APN, Avaya Podcast Network, and where he does a lot of great interviews of various agencies, and he's involved in many different, you know, AFCO and NINA committees as well, and you know, I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that. And Ken was actually he worked in law enforcement right near where I live. I'm from New Hampshire, just south of Manchester, and he was actually in law enforcement in Salem, New Hampshire, and now resides by the Avtec headquarters in South Carolina. Just tremendous experience and had a lot of insights to these best practices as well. So the top challenges facing PSAPs today, what we typically do is we start out the day with a whiteboard, and we go around the room, everyone introduces themselves, and we say, what are your top challenges? At the end of the day, if we can brainstorm and we can try to solve those top challenges, what are the things that keep you up at night, you know? And everyone has to kind of come up with 1 or 2 things. And these are the main things that come up over and over, right? So, you know, hiring is a key issue. Retention is a big one. We need to hire better, faster, smarter. That seems to be you know, a constant theme. And then transitioning to next generation 911, which we'll all touch upon today, as it is really going to, if it hasn't already affected your agency, it will be very soon. And it's not just text messaging. Everyone thinks NG911 is text messaging. There's a lot of different forms of media, a lot of different forms of data. The IP network, which allows for streamlining a lot of communications, not only within your center, but within you know, centers regionally and even, you know, internationally at some point. So we'll touch upon, you know, how to make that effective transition. Doing more with less, right? So sometimes budgets are tight. Oftentimes, right, we're being asked to do more with the same amount of resources or less resources. So how do we automate a lot of the manual tasks, right? So if you think about the day-to-day tasks that happen within your PSAP, there's definitely things that have already been automated, but there's still a lot of manual tasks that are taking up a lot of time and resources. And then interoperability is key to that, right? Making sure that's what helps allow for a lot of that automation. If the systems are interoperable together, you get a lot of those benefits. So quality and training is super hot right now. For those of you that aren't aware yet, APCO and ENA have been working on a standards draft for quality assurance and quality improvement, and that draft is just in the final stages of completion, and we'll get into more detail. But it's even more critical as we transition to next generation 911, in that we're going to be handling new forms of media, video as well, which is will be a dramatic shift in how we handle situations if we're seeing video along with that. Text messaging, all of this new technologies, this new change requires that we maintain a consistent quality, consistent experience for the caller, and we're going to be dealing with a lot. So just reviewing calls and making sure that people are understanding the way the new technologies and everything is working, the new procedures is going to be important. And then employee retention, right? So, hiring on one end all the way through, how do we retain and recognize and reward and incentivize our employees so they're happy, they do a great job, and better experience, right? There's a 1%, there's a direct correlation for every 1% increase in employee satisfaction. You'll see that on the other end in citizen satisfaction. So, how do we maintain and improve employee satisfaction? So the first tip before I turn it over to Mark is, this is a great one from Richmond 911 in Virginia, and they were faced with similar challenges to what you might be faced with in bringing in candidates quickly enough to fill all the necessary positions that they were looking for. And so what they came up with, and through trial and error, they came up with this great all-in-one day hiring blitz that they do at their nearby police academy, where they have kind of the full gamut of what someone would normally go through in 6 weeks to 3 months. They do all in one day. So they have an orientation session, then they use Critical for computerized for the pre-employment test. The candidates have to go through 9 different modules, to ensure they can multitask and manage stress and handle critical thinking. And then they do a background pre-screening questionnaire as well, so they're already starting that process. There's a suitability assessment, and then if they make it all the way through, at the end of the day, they do a panel interview, and they come away with an offer letter, just pending a few more background checks. But at that point, you've already got the candidate excited. Typically, a really good candidate that's available is off. It already has a new job within 5 to 10 days, typically. So you have to get them in, get them excited, get them quick, and then they've even streamlined the background check information as well. People on their team within the communication center are helping with background check to streamline that process as well. So there you see the offer letter of employment, and that's just a great way to kind of take that several week or several month hiring time period down to 1 day, and then just a couple weeks for the background check. So another great thing is, so once you've got the employees hired, another good thing we're seeing is more and more organizations are using something called Tiny Pulse. We use it at VPI. It's been an incredible tool. Once a week, you just have to answer one question, And, the question would be like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? It's completely anonymous. You go in, you just, answer the question, and then you can give cheers. It says, would you like to give anyone in your department cheers? And, I've done that many times to many people that have helped me out in some way. And we actually do incentives within our company. Whoever gets the most cheers per quarter, gets special rewards. And we'll get into rewards later, but this is a very fantastic, low-cost way of gathering anonymous employee feedback to make sure your employees are happy. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Mark Fletcher from Avaya, who will introduce Next Generation 911 and discuss best practices for transitioning to NG 911.
Thanks, Patrick. I really appreciate it. It was a great year delivering these seminars around the country with you and Ken and everybody else that showed up. We really touched a lot of people. We had a lot of great questions that were raised by everybody out there. It was definitely an eye-opening situation. So I'm Mark Fletcher. I'm the ENP and Chief Architect for Worldwide Public Safety Solutions at Avaya. My role is to promote public safety within our product set, as well as keep after the legislative and regulatory side of the business. I'm on the NINA Institute board. I sit on the APCO Standards Development Committee, and I'm going to be, next week, I'm actually going down to Washington, where I'm going to be on the newly announced task force on optimal PSAP architecture. So a lot of great people are on that committee with me. Really looking forward to delivering all that. So the network design of 911 today is really kind of where we're stuck in a rut, and that's because it's really an analog technology, and it's based on fixed endpoints. The number one thing is that it assumes that a phone number equals a location, and the databases are built around that. And while it's a simple architecture, the locations are static, and it doesn't account for the mobility that devices have today. And we first started seeing mobility with cellular telephones, right, back in the mid-'80s. And now voice over IP came into place, and now mobility is the thing. As a manufacturer of telecommunications equipment, in an industry, we spend billions and billions and billions of dollars to make devices and phone numbers not equal a specific location. Yet that's the main premise that 911 is built around, and that creates a major problem. That's probably the number one driver, one of the number one drivers for next generation 911 services. So we go to the next slide. Really, the transition to next gen 911 is something that people get worried about, but it can happen at your own pace. The beauty behind the backbone of next generation 911 is really in its design. So you've got the ESI network, which is really the core new network that's going to replace the existing network that's out there. And you've got all of the components that are going to do the routing and all of this, and that's all built with very high reliability, availability, redundant, Ethernet links. And then you've got the world that exists out there that's in the legacy environment. And the beauty of the transition is that new PSAPs can come online and build in that new ESINet backbone. They're automatically IP connected to the new infrastructure today. So we build the network, new PSAPs coming online, get built and then connected into that. And the model actually accounts, when we build this out here, you'll see there are two components on the legacy side, or really at the edge of the ESINet. And those are legacy PSAP gateways and legacy network gateways. And those are elements that basically connect the old infrastructure into the new infrastructure. And this is really the magic that allows you to just migrate away from the legacy environments into the new environment. So the number two tip is you got to build the ESINet. Before you can deliver next gen 911, deliver it, you've got to have that ESINet in place. Now you can start putting your PSAPs online, and when you look for new PSAP equipment, you need to make sure that you're NENA I3 compliant for Next-Gen 911. That's going to allow you to fit into this model, and you're going to either connect in through gateway adapters or you're going to connect into the new ESINet today. Pretty basic. So we move to the next slide. The compelling reasons to move to next generation 911. People are communicating at different levels today. We've got different parts of government that have to deal with citizens. It's not just public safety. So as we enable this new form of communication, what we're doing is we're adding in the capabilities for citizens to better communicate. Now, why is that important to 911? Well, we see that today with 311 applications. We see that today with just self-service applications and utilizing ways for people to reach out into their communities. The more we can offload the non-emergency traffic, the better, the more efficient we can become on public safety. And people are used to communicating through new forms of communication. It's not just phone calls. It's email, Twitter, Facebook, instant messages, Gmail, Skype. It's a multimedia, internet-enabled society that's coming out. I mean, there was an article in the paper just a couple of weeks ago about someone who was found based on information that was located on their Facebook page of where they were going to go hiking. Now, that's really what NextGen is all about. It's making that information available into public safety. It's automating some of that and doing the work for the dispatchers, bringing what we call a multimodal PSAP interface into play. It's not just a phone call, it's other references, it's other information that's out there. It's also better usage of agency capabilities. Could be language assist, specialty agencies, or even social services. At some point in time, 911 is going to be just the indicator of who I need to get the session or communication session to, because that's what a person dialed. Today we're always concerned about, don't call 911 for your non-emergency stuff. And the main reason for that is because there's a limited number of 911 trunks coming in. Got to keep those open and clear for the emergency calls. So as we move to next generation 911 and we move to this IP-enabled environment, it all comes in on a big data pipe. And I really remove the limits for 911 calls. I remove the limits for 311 calls. I can take this much traffic into my center. I really don't care what that traffic is. And that allows you to become more efficient in the overall processing and the way you take your traffic in. We go to the next slide. Next generation 911 is all about utilizing what we call additional information that's provided through the network from the originating devices. The additional information could be location information, floor plans, multimedia, video feeds. And the key question is, what are the current and future infrastructure capabilities to route that based on the additional context? It could be something as simple as a language indicator in a profile. I speak Spanish. I need a Spanish-speaking call taker. Or I've got a video American Sign Language call coming in. Great. We either need to engage in video interpretation services, or maybe we've got someone in our agency that can act as a video interpreter. Or, as my network expands out, maybe I can borrow a resource from a close-by agency. So we talk about mutual aid all the time when we're talking about the physical assets, police cars, ambulances, fire trucks. What about mutual aid for dispatch? Right? I've got a skill set, whether it be a language, video interpretation, or some other specialty that another agency can provide. By being in a large collective environment that can easily collaborate and share, we can now start sharing resources. And that's, again, it's all based on the information. How do we build the networks out? What does the new network architecture look like? Really, the magic in this is in the NINA i3 model. And this is where each individual county, agency, state, there's really no boundary here. It's whatever makes sense for that particular geography. All of the networks build out for their local environment. And then through a collaborative conferencing model, all the agencies are interconnected with each other. So it's truly a network of networks. And that's what the term internet means. So we all know the internet as a thing, and we, the internet is Google and everything else, but an internet is a network of networks. And that's what NINA i3 is really about, creating the network of networks. So today you can transfer to agencies that are on your selected router, and that's a very limited geography. If I'm in New Jersey, I'm not going to be able to transfer a call to a PSAP in California, except over a 10-digit line that I may or may not have. And then when I do that, that's not really going through their 911 network. So they may not get things like Amy Alley screen pops. But when we do collaborative conferencing through an internet of networks, again, I can transfer an incident from anywhere to anywhere that's on that network. Right? So we bring the call into the cloud, we route it accordingly, and then we can transfer that call. So moving to the next slide, another thing that the collaborative conferencing gets us, drilling down into the more local level, when I have a call come into the 911 cloud, the next-gen 911 cloud, I've got the caller, I've got the additional data, and maybe I've got some SMS or MMS messaging that's associated with it. The first thing I do is I anchor that caller in a persistent collaborative conference, and the system examines the information. What's the caller ID? What's the ANI look like? What's the location? And then I determine what call taker is most appropriate for this particular call incident. I grab that person, bring them into the conference, as well as other resources like session recording. And then if I need additional resources, which could be language line, poison control, social services, or even another agency that I'm going to hand off to, I invite them into this conference instance. By doing that, I bring the caller in and I anchor them in a specific spot, and they don't move. The value here is that all the data that gets collected with the call delivery, or all of the data that gets added to the call during the life of the call, becomes persistent. It stays with that anchored call. So now when I invite in the other agencies or the additional services, everybody has access to everything that has been collected for this call. And the collaborative conferencing environment is really the most innovative thing about the NINA i3 model, because it allows all agencies to collaborate with each other, share data with each other, and really opens this up into capabilities that were just never there before. And again, utilizing resources that were out there. So let's look at a use case on next generation 911 and how this would work on something that you're very familiar with. So today there's a motor vehicle accident, and the call goes from OnStar to the OnStar call center up in Detroit or down in North Carolina or wherever that particular call center instance happens to be. They extract all the information out of the vehicle, they run their models against it, and then they place a call into the proper PSAP and hand off all this information, the delta V, that they've, number of occupants, whatever they've got, verbally to the call taker. Well, let's step ahead into next gen. OnStar gets that crash notification into their network, and they still extract all the data out of the vehicle, but now instead of calling a PSAP, they feed this event into the next-gen 911 network, where it becomes anchored in a conference bridge. Now the next-gen network takes over. Great, we need a call taker. Okay, this is the call taker we need based on geography. Bring that call taker into the conference. Now they've got all the crash information that's been collected. Based on that information, maybe we can see that it was a high delta V, overturned vehicle, crush zones have gone off, indicating there's an 80% probability of lower extremity trauma, and this is probably going to be heavy rescue. Well, we can, attached to the ESI network, could be local health services. And at the same time that we're establishing communications with the PSAPs, we could be providing trauma resources a heads up. Hey, we're going to have something coming in here that's pretty serious. We're going to need a trauma room. We're going to need a doctor with these skill sets. You might want to get the helicopter warmed up. And whether it's dispatched or not, we're talking about policy here, right? But we're talking about getting the information to the people who need it. Now, when paramedics arrive on scene, everybody is on this network. Everybody is sharing all that data. And all the telemetry that they're collecting is available to everybody. So people can start making intelligent decisions. And maybe based on that accident, you know, other major events are going to go to another hospital. Another great example is to better serve callers with disabilities. So a call initiates what we call a total conversation call, a next-gen 911 call. They've got a profile, or their device has indicated that this is a person with a disability. I need remote video interpretation. Great. So the same thing happens, comes into the network. We anchor it in a conference bridge. We know we need a PSAP call taker. We know we need recording and logging. So we apply all that, and we go out and we grab a video remote interpreter, whether it's someone in our agency, someone we're going to borrow from an agency, or an outside service that we've contracted with. They become a member of this conference bridge. Now, the cool part about this is the PSAP call taker now has the ability to view the video from the person originating the call. The PSAP call taker now has the ability to hear the information coming from the initiator of the call. And we all know there's audio clues in the background, there's visual clues of domestic violence, there's all kinds of information that you're not getting today. And those are the reasons for bad dispatch, for not understanding, was there a domestic? Is there a weapon laying on the table? You're relying on the video remote interpreter to see it, translate it, and there are privacy laws that come into play. They're there as a video remote interpreter. They're allowed to interpret. They're not allowed to make judgment on what they see. And so a lot of that's hidden from the dispatcher. So really what this lets us do is it lets us consolidate virtually. It allows separate locations to start working together as one big communication center. This lets us share the technical resources and the expertise without the stress of physically picking people up and then putting them in one big building. Most of the PSAPs that are out there, like 80% of the PSAPs, are 4 people or less. In a lot of places, there's 1 or 2, and they may be the records person, or they may be the jailer, or they may have some other job. By building a large consolidated network, but letting the people stay where they are, it allows us to utilize all of these things. Utilize all the resources, back people up, and it allows the smallest center and the largest center to have a common technical resource. The best practices around this, you have to educate the decision makers and the call takers. You have to have great network engineers that are technology savvy and, from a telecommunicator perspective. We've got to really focus on the interfaces. So one of the things that can also be empowered with your team is from additional information. You've probably seen the Smart 911 in the industry. If you haven't, this is a great way of getting information. There's a picture of my profile. This was down in, I forget what PSAP. Oh, this was in Nashville, just outside of Nashville, at the NENA conference last year. I'm standing in the PSAP, and I made a 911 call there, and this is what came up on the dispatcher's screen. So it shows that I have medical records, and there's pictures, and there's additional information about my Smart 911 profile. And I believe if you go to the next slide, one of the pieces of information that I have in there is a floor plan of my house. Not that I've got a huge estate that it's difficult to find me. The important part about this is that my remote office is in the detached garage. So if I dial 911 during the day and it goes into a Smart 911 PSAP, the important part is don't come knocking on the front door. No one's home. I'm in the office. I'm in the garage. I can also list the vehicles that should be in the driveway. This is additional data. This is happening today. This is happening in a lot of PSAPs today. So we're looking at taking this kind of information from businesses and from the public and expanding it through Smart 911 type apps or just through contributing this information over networks as NextGen actually gets rolled out and deployed. Go to the next slide. One of the things that you have to do with this is prepare for the visual trauma. So you've got to periodically screen and promptly treat the call takers and dispatchers where it's justified. There's going to be more emotional preparedness and mental toughness training that's made available to these folks. It's bad enough when you take a call in and it's someone you know or it's a family member. We see that in the news all the time. You're now potentially going to see live video from horrific incidents. You've got to be concerned with, am I going to show PSAP video to the person calling 911? There are times when seeing a dispatcher may actually help calm a situation. There are times when you may not want that video seen. But the dispatcher, if they're going to be seeing live video, yeah, look, the guy's decapitated. Oh, my God, there's blood all over the place. You got to be careful. This is going to really require a whole extra piece of visual trauma. So you've got to nurture the peer support. And now it's more important than ever. So that's it for the best practices from our perspective on what we fleshed out of this.
Great. Thanks so much, Fletcher. That was fantastic information. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ken from Avtec, who will be discussing IP dispatching and interoperability best practices for dispatch centers.
All right. Good morning and good afternoon, depending upon which time zone you're in. So we're going to talk about IP and dispatch consoles, dispatch communication consoles, and basically where do I have the knowledge to talk about this is, as Patrick talked about earlier, I did 20 years in law enforcement up there in New England, and back when the simple console was a push button, change the channel manually, and things have come a long way. And so we're going to talk about the best practices of moving to IP, dispatching and interoperability. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Patrick. So why transition to IP? Well, first of all, you want to get rid of all that hardware that's in the back room. If you're still working off what they call a TDM backbone, there's a lot of hardware that is back there that has a tendency to fail, needs to be replaced. It's harder to replace. It's costly to replace. And moving to IP allows you to have a software feature base. And as you can see by the technology of today, software is enhanced greatly. The features, they're just on your simple cell phone, are incredible. Now think about the features that now can be found on your dispatching communication consoles. Plus it allows you to upgrade without having to change out hardware every time. You know, if you have an upgrade for your dispatch, load new software, keep the same stuff. The other nice thing about IP is it provides a distributed system. As Fletch talked about in Internet, it's a system of systems, and it allows you to use the entire IP infrastructure of your network and your security that your company or your department and facility is built in to keep your system secure and up and running. Okay. Yep. And the other things about IP is it's fault tolerant, meaning if, like with the Internet, one section goes down, or even one console goes down, you still have other consoles that are still working. There is no single point of failure. So the other part about IP is any to any at any time. So when they say endpoint, what is an endpoint? Endpoint is a radio. It's a voice over IP telephone, a SIP phone, an analog phone. It's another console. It's trunk, conventional, P25, DMR, motor turbo, all those. So any to any means that your console, if you're using IP, has the ability to talk and patch these endpoints so they can talk to each other without having to change channels, without having to do any type of manual switching of equipment on their end or your end. It's just simple touchpad stuff. There is a massive cost savings if you're using leased lines and going from that TDM background into IP allows you to migrate from those leased lines. Go ahead and switch next slide. Okay, so what happens with IP is the software allows you to configure your dispatch screens. And we talked about training earlier on, and you can see as the screens progress here, they get more and more complex. And the nice thing about IP software-based dispatching is as you bring your dispatchers, your new dispatchers, into the fold, you want to train them. So you start out with simplistic screens, and then you can slowly add features and functionality as they progress through their training. So you don't overwhelm them with the screen you're currently seeing now and have them figure it out all at once. The nice thing about these screens also is if you're moving and migrating to the software, they can, the software IP dispatching can build the screens to mimic what you currently have, and then you can migrate from that as well. Okay, next slide. All right. The other thing is Fletch talked about bringing people that are geographically dispersed into those conferences. Well, you can do the same with your dispatching communication software as well. Is that you can have your fire, your EMS, your police all separated. Not only that, they can be local, they can be state, they can be county. If it's all connected via IP, you can share radio frequency channels all on a dispatcher. So if they're working on the same type of system and those systems work together, the same time, by systems working together, I mean dispatching consoles are the same, then there's the ability to share endpoints, radio frequencies, so that your local fire can talk to your state police as well as your county, or vice versa, all the way around. So with IP, it allows the ability to have geographically dispersed connectivity, so that if you do have, say, a car chase that is going from one county to another, one state to another, if they're connected in that way, you can continue the radio communications and monitoring all the way through. Next slide. So if you haven't moved from the traditional TDM radios and you're looking at IP, you need to bridge that gap between assumption and fact on what you need to look for when you're going to be upgrading to an IP console. So one of the things is whether or not you want to look at proprietary or open dispatch consoles. And with proprietary meaning it's locked down by whoever the console provider is. It's a single source to deal with. training and services, minimal configuration are some of the advantages to deal with, but there are also some disadvantages to that too. I hit the slide, next slide. There you go, disadvantages. Problem is, it is less flexible. You're locked into a particular system. You know, there's contracts, there's training, additional expenses. If you're working with a proprietary console vendor, you are locked into that person's cycle. Any screw, nut, bolt, cable, anything has to come from that particular vendor. Now, again, that could be an advantage because you're only one person to deal with, but it's also a disadvantage if you're not happy with what you're getting or the cost is high. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So the other option is an open proprietary vendor, and numerous support qualities. Support for LMR, using your network. You don't have to have a vendor come in and build a network which costs you more. It supports standard COTS hardware, stuff that you can buy off the shelf. You don't have to buy it from any particular vendor. You can go best of breed. It allows lower cost. If you decide you don't want it, you can't afford best of breed because of your budget, you can look at what is the requirements that I need and what's the best price I can find. And when you have your hardware go end of life, you can easily replace that. You can get it anywhere, and you can shop around for best prices. It's been a simple fact that competition increases quality of product, training, and services. If you don't like it, go find somebody else because there's somebody out there doing it better if somebody you're dealing with isn't working out well. But there are some disadvantages to open as well. Implementation requires configuration of various components. You have to make sure that they all work together. And there's coordination of multiple points of contact. So that is a disadvantage as well in the fact that you have to have different contacts for the different parts of your system. Then again, with the proprietary, if you're not happy with that one person, it does give you those options. So what do your dispatchers need? We talked about training as one of the issues, and they need standardization. Ability to limit that training, ability to get up to speed faster. So with an IP dispatching console that uses this configurable software, you can get them up to speed faster because you're going to slowly build upon what they've learned and then continue that progression. And some of the tools that they'll need when they're going through it is configurable graphic user interface, telephony, console of consoles, facility intercoms, timers, IP cameras. All of this technology is now built into these IP console systems. It's not a simple push button that's on the desk anymore with a microphone. These are things that your dispatchers need because, as Fletch talked about, there's a lot of information coming in now. And there's a lot of things that you're going to have to do with it. Maps, diagrams, alarms. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So when looking at your consoles and the different things that you need, one of those is wireline or wireless. And most people think, well, I want wireless because my cell phone's wireless and my old hardline phone was wireline. Well, it's not necessarily the way that works. Wireless means a serial or a USB connection to a control station. You don't get as much functionality out of that. But wireline is a direct Ethernet connection. It takes the power of IP and it connects it directly to the radio infrastructure, and it allows certain aspects. Now, wireless allows you to connect to proprietary or legacy equipment, which is great if you're migrating from an older system to a newer system where you want the wireline. And it's also great if you have no wireline access to a disaster recovery location. And if you want to set up a disaster recovery location, really in a snap, you can use the wireless access. And it's very simple to set up for a limited scope. But there are some disadvantages to wireless as well. Access to only a few talk groups, so it is limited. You don't get the full functionality of all the radio infrastructure. Radios and P25 standards are requiring a lot more out of your radios and your dispatch consoles. And with wireless, you're not going to get that. Right? And again, big thing, consoles may not have priority, which means when they transmit, they may get overrun by what the field units are saying. So advantages of wireline: you get a larger feature set, console priority. There is really no risk of RF coverage loss because it's through IP, it's through the Ethernet. Okay, a lot of your backroom equipment is reduced down to the bare minimum. It's very simple to configure and scale. And that's the big issue right there, scale. As it allows scalability so that you can add more and more systems and radios to it. However, like anything, there's the other side of the coin. We have disadvantages. You may not get access to a disaster recovery location. There may not be Ethernet available. Your network may not extend out that way when you're looking at a white powder or a black hole situation, and you have to immediately set up. And it may not connect to all proprietary and legacy systems. For those of you using some of these, there's a larger vendor out there that is very, very proprietary and locks you in. Sometimes the wireline connection doesn't work. So thinking about IP dispatch consoles and understanding what are your disaster management plans. Most people think I'm just going to use a portable radio. Well, wouldn't you want all the functionality of a full dispatching center that you can grab into a dispatch console system for your disaster recovery? So what happens if you lose your radio infrastructure, or you can't gain access, a white powder, or you have a black hole event? Have you thought about the plans that you're going to be doing for that and setting up? IP dispatching console systems allow for you to take advantage of all the dispatching functionality in a regular console at a DR spot. So when you look at this slide here, you can tell because it's IP, you have various dispatch centers, you have a backup dispatch center. You can even have your data center so that your recordings and all your audio recordings with metadata are what they call data vaulted off at a separate location, so you don't have to worry about it. They can be replicated out. You can have remote locations. One thing that's not shown on here now is with new technology, and tablets allow the ability to have dispatching consoles mobile on a tablet over LTE or wireless throughout the building. So with a supervisor walking around with a tablet that has access to 4 dispatching channels, in most cases at this point, wirelessly throughout the building can monitor. And you can also take that and put it on LTE now and leave the building for command and control centers at major scenes. But what happens if I lose part of that? Hit the button, and you lose that. Well, you still have 2 remote centers to back things up. And even if you lose a tower, the fact that they connected IP to a larger WAN cloud allows you still to have communication aspects to all your other units. Next. Okay, so if you have an IP console, and it's an older one, and it's still got some TDM stuff to it, and doesn't have all the facts and features to it, there are some ways to improve that console. USB jack boxes are coming out. A jack box is something you plug in your headset to. So it makes it easier to plug in, plug out. They have different USB ports on it, so a supervisor can listen in. A trainer can sit next to a trainee, and they can both have control for audio splitting. Ring-in use indicators. When you're dispatching IP console, will let this light go off to say, I'm on a call. Don't bother me. Okay, I am busy, or I'm available to take calls. There's integration of third-party apps between instant messaging and GPS that can play into IP consoles because it is IP. You can bring in web browsers right onto the screen and have the functionality of the internet, depending upon your network security protocols, all the way down through searching Google and YouTube. Now, I know nobody wants to authorize that, but it allows you to bring in GPS software and all those things. Flexible resolution of screen size. Some dispatch centers have massive screens on the wall. Some have 2 screens on the desk, and you want to span it across. So you need to have flexibility of screen size. There are plenty of solutions out there that will help you take and do that with your existing console. Adding a third-party computer-aided dispatching system to it gives you additional functionality to add certain things. Those are the best practices for IP consoles and dispatching interoperability. And that's what I got. Go ahead, Patrick.
Thanks so much, Ken. I really appreciate that, and there's just some amazing capabilities really worth looking into. At this point, in the next 10 minutes, or we might go a little bit over for those of you that can stay with us, we're going to talk about quality assurance, recording, quality assurance, and quality improvement best practices that were shared at the event. So first best practice, and Fletch, hit the nose on the head with, you have to make sure all your technology is NENA I3 compliant. From a recording perspective, right, as a recorder, we are the catcher's mitt. We're catching all of this information, this data, the communications from different devices. What the standard says, it has to be open standards, non-proprietary hardware and software. That applies to virtually all technology in the I3 spec. We have to record all forms of media in the same system. We collect additional attributes from the ESI net, so a lot more metadata that we can use to search for calls, where CAD data and case processing system data as well. Record and track transferred calls, which is nice, right? We have as Fletch mentioned, there's this PCI conference bridge, which makes recording, quote, transferred calls. We're not necessarily always transferring calls. We're bringing people into that conference bridge and just continuing that recording there. It makes that a lot easier. And then, there's a question about security, and the NENA I3 spec really hammers in on security as well to make sure everything's authenticated from a voice and data perspective as well. So a great best practice, which many PSAPs are starting to do, is integrate the recording system with the CAD system, right? So just tag additional data from the CAD system, like incident ID, incident type, maybe the location, maybe it's typically more accurate in the CAD system, incident severity, any kind of notes, anything you want to tag from the CAD system to the call recording can now be done. Now that can all be used in searches, and it can also be used to create rules for which calls you want to evaluate. Maybe certain incident types are more important to you and your agency, maybe certain incident severities, things like that. So it's important that we kind of think beyond QAing EMD calls. So we spend a lot of time, typically we start with EMD just because there's been more standards around QAing EMD calls, but fire calls, police calls, even non-emergency calls, it's important to QA those as well. So the public expects it. They don't place a higher value on just the EMD calls. And there's a lot of value in QAing different types of calls to ensure that we are implementing the right processes and protocols. So some of the quality assurance standards out here, I won't read them all, but the third bullet here, the new APCO QA/QI standard that's in draft format, it's on the fast track to becoming ANSI certified. It's not a required standard, but it's highly recommended. In the draft, it says, we should evaluate at least 2% of all calls, and then all cases, all high priority incidents involving catastrophic loss or high acuity events, ASAP or within 5 days, right? And you may be saying, well, how am I going to do that today, right? We don't have the resources to, we're lucky if we can do one call, per call taker per month, or, just the high priority incidents, right? So typically what you want to do is try to automate as much of that process as you can to be able to achieve this. So Fletch is actually on that development committee. So thanks, Fletch, for helping put this into place, and we're really looking forward to the final version here. But just to show you kind of how workflow in QA typically goes today, and this may look really familiar. You search through the CAD records. There's a sudden emergency, right? Something comes up. We could begin to search in the logging recorder. So we're trying to find a certain incident or a certain call, and we go look it up by date and time. There's a few data elements. There's typically not too much to search by. We get distracted again. Return to search in the recorder. We burn recordings to a CD and send it to the QA team or whoever's doing QA. Then we evaluate, we score the calls in typically in an Excel spreadsheet. Supervisor gets a printout of the recommendations, and then the call taker receives instruction. And even though I just covered it in a minute, it typically takes 3 to 6 weeks, right? So by the time the call taker receives feedback, they've already most likely forgotten about the call that you've evaluated. So it's important to speed up this process and deliver feedback in a more timely manner. So how do we do that? What are some of the ways, and how do we achieve, the 2% of all calls and 100% of high priority calls? And it goes back to tagging CAD data to the call. So if we can have the calls flagged as high priority calls and have the incident type tagged to the call recording, then we can schedule rules. And we call these business rules that automatically schedule a random sample of 2% of all calls to be evaluated and 100% of all high priority calls. Maybe multi-alarm fires, officer-involved shooting, domestic violence. Those automatically then get assigned. You'll find typically 80 to 90% of the time wasted during QA is actually finding those calls, finding the calls that you want to evaluate, kind of hunting and pecking through the recording system. Well, you don't have to do that with the to-do list. You're automating that, and then you literally just start the evaluation. The QA form pops up along with the audio, and a lot of PSAPs are starting to record their console video as well, so you can see what call takers are doing as they're, using the CAD mapping system. They'll pull that little video off onto a second monitor as they're evaluating the call, and then they'll go through the same forms. We've built in the APCO-NENA recommended forms into the tool here, and it just pops up if it's a police case call taking call. It already knows that you're going to get that form automatically along with the appropriate call, and that typically will double or triple your efficiency in terms of evaluating the calls. Another thing is, for those of you who use Priority Dispatch, again, Priority Dispatch has a service where they actually do the QA for you. They'll do it in the evenings, and you come in the morning, and they have, the QAs kind of ready for you. They were looking for a way to also increase efficiency. So what we did is we worked closely with them, and we introduced just this play button within their Aqua software, and it's available to anyone in the new Aqua release. And typically, you just hit the play button, and the audio and the video, again, just pops up. So you don't have to go look for the call recording anymore related to that case. It's automatically linked. It's going to pop up. And this works with any recording system. It's just a tool where it records a copy of your console audio and the video. It just layers on top of any existing system and then pulls that up so you can QA and be much more effective. Then automating QA feedback to call takers is important too, right? We talked about a 3 to 6 week period is too long, right? The APCO-NENA standard that's being developed recommends, giving feedback within a week. So how do we do that, right? We have to evaluate those calls weekly and provide feedback right away. So the ability for call takers, dispatchers to give feedback and for them to be able to listen to their evaluated calls along with seeing the scores and hearing that call as soon as it's been evaluated. Another thing is, in the actual QA forms, one of the things that a lot of PSAPs were requesting was the ability to add coaching or reminder methods to the actual form itself, right? You can't do that in Excel. You can't add, a coaching assignment that's automatically going to get triggered. So we ended up adding it here in the tool, and basically you add an action, and if they get that question wrong, then it's when this question's scored by the QA person or the manager who's listening and evaluating the call, they'll automatically receive either a reminder message via email or a little coaching assignment that they can take based on that question, that skill that it was associated with. And what's nice is you're able to track that they actually read the message and or took that coaching assignment. So they, if you have different people on different shifts, no matter, it basically automates that, so the supervisor doesn't always have to remember, and then you have some accountability. They can't say, well, you never told me to do that, or you never trained me on that. Yes, you did. You took this coaching, or you acknowledged that you read this message on this date at this time. So ongoing coaching is huge. So again, automating coaching, but also just live coaching, right? We do a lot of training and formal training. This is just a study that kind of explains the value of coaching, but it's called the Hawthorne effect. It was in a manufacturing plant in the Midwest in the early 1900s, and they basically, tested the effect of changing the environment. So they turn off the lights, productivity increase. Turn down the lights, productivity increase. They changed the way the office, the workstations were set up, productivity increase. And no matter what they changed, regardless of the change, they saw an increase of productivity. It was a short-term increase, but it's kind of showing the effect of if you're continuously coaching, and there's a formal process for that, and the best supervisors do that naturally, then you're going to see this constant performance improvement. And employees really like being coached and recognized, and it shows that they care, and that's really what people respond to best. I know we're at the top of the hour. I apologize, we're a little bit over. I'll try to get through these last 6 best practices as quickly as possible. So allowing call takers to flag calls for your evaluation. One, for coaching without scoring, right? So not all calls need to be scored. Maybe I'd like, as a dispatcher, there's something that I was unclear about. I just want to flag my call real quick, right? And a lot of the recording systems have little tools that allow you to flag calls while you're on the call or right after that call. And I would just like some feedback, from the supervisor on how I could do better next time. That's a really great way to kind of get them to buy into the QA process. We've seen PSAPs, shared they were doing, Winter Olympics, right, or Academy Awards, and basically they would create a competition for a month, and they had all these different categories, right? So just the funniest calls, the different types of incidents. They create categories for like best, multi-alarm fire, and then they had different types of calls categories, and then call takers and dispatchers got to submit their calls to that category, and at the end they had gold medals for each category: gold, silver, bronze. And then they also did, one piece that did it with Academy Awards. I said that was a really kind of creative way to not only, get people engaged for that month and really, get the performance up, but also they created best practice call libraries. Now they have all these really good examples of all the different incident types that they're able to use during training, initial training, and ongoing training. So outsourcing, I mentioned Party Dispatch has a program called National Q. They have professional quality assurance evaluators that will, in a non-biased fashion, review the calls and provide feedback to the supervisor on what needs to be coached on. We also have a partner, Replay Systems, that does a fantastic job. They have a really great team of QA analysts as well that is doing it for a lot of agencies, and they do a great job. So if you feel like you'd like some help getting started with quality assurance, or maybe you guys continue to do EMD, and maybe you want to start police and fire and have them do the police and fire to get you, they do a really great job, and it can often be a lot less expensive than having to staff those positions yourself. taking your QA standards full circle is just, QA goes beyond just the evaluating of calls and communications, right? Use your QA standards when you're selecting candidates, right? Engage your senior call takers in the hiring process, right? And introduce candidates to the QA process early. Engaging evaluators in calibration is important to make sure all evaluators are on the same page, and involving call takers and dispatchers in that as well. So maybe you start off, more frequently, weekly, you pick a call, everyone evaluates it, and you see where you're at on each of the questions to make sure everyone's being consistent. Not that, Tom is always the easy one and I have Mary and she's always harder. You want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And then continue to document and reinforce QA standards through remedial training as well. Citizen surveys are becoming more and more popular and important, right? So after the actual incident is handled, send them, whether it's an email, if you're capturing emails, or send them, a brief survey in the mail, and just get feedback, right? This is going to allow you to improve your operations, and then follow up any issues that you receive with a personal call. It makes a huge impact. You'll see, even if just in general with customer service or citizen service, if you've had a bad experience anywhere, think of in your personal life, and someone follows up with you, you're likely to be even more loyal than you were because they actually took the time to try to correct the issue and speak with you about it. Speech and text analytics is also gaining a lot of traction. It's been used in the commercial in the business world for about 10 years now, and it's really starting to make its way into public safety and security as well. Basically what it does is it translates all the audio into an index that can be searched upon. It's not a transcription, so you're not going to be able to read it per se, but you're able to search on it, and the system knows how to read that index and search for keywords, phrases. Even more popular is not just the searching of keywords and phrases, but categorizing certain types of calls and incidents. As they come in, it'll just start categorizing calls so you can see what types of calls and things are coming in. Just a case study related to an agency in Pennsylvania. They use speech analytics to categorize calls containing the words both porch and fire, and actually found a number of other addresses that had similar crime scenarios. They were able to use that evidence to charge the appropriate suspects. So a really great way of using categorization and looking for other calls related to that incident. And the last best practice we have is retention and recognition, right? So huge turnover within our industry at 19% annually. People want recognition. Salaries, important, right, for day-to-day living, but recognition is what we really crave most. Managers have to be cognizant of recognizing jobs well done. If you think about it, right, if you've ever left a job, most of the time you're leaving your boss, not the actual job. So we have to be very aware of that just in our day-to-day coaching and training. Keep employees in the loop, give them the opportunity to weigh in new policies, procedures, hiring, and then rotate employees through various tasks to keep things fresh, right? We can get burnt out if we're just doing the same thing over and over. Training is a great way to motivate and reward. This webinar will be available. We'll send you the link to the recording. So, allow your team to spend, an hour and 15 minutes, maybe over the course of a week to watch this. And maybe there's certain parts you'd like them to watch. Training is a great way. These state conferences, these public safety forums that we'll be hosting throughout the country this year, and we'll be sure to send you a schedule of the cities and dates. And training the trainer is also great. It empowers people to be mentors within your organization. Field units, this came up over and over. The agencies that had really good partnerships with their field units, you know, whether it's police, fire, EMS, you know, having you know, the law enforcement team come in to cook and serve food for the dispatchers, going out with the actual team out into the field, and then having them come into the dispatch center, taking pictures. You know, sometimes the dispatchers, unfortunately, get forgotten, right, when there's something heroic that happens. But every once in a while, you'll see something in the media where the dispatcher, you know, is really recognized, and a lot of that, the field units in those areas are doing a great job kind of bringing them into the fold as part of that team that made the rescue or whatever it may be. That person, you know, in the comm center is never going to forget that for the rest of their life, and will most likely be a very loyal employee. So this really helps, and something that you have to kind of proactively engage with your field team and get them more and more involved. Developing a local relationship with the local media as well is important to continuously have an eye on what's going on and the improvements you're making, especially with Next Gen 911. It's just a fantastic opportunity to get more media exposure for everyone on your team. Peer recognition is great. Put this the firefighting, the Dalmatian dog, just a great way, very low-cost way is, you know, one agency had basically everyone got white dogs, and they gave out, you know, 20 or so spots to everyone within that comm center, and every time a peer did something helpful or well, they could recognize their peers, and the person with the most spots on the dog at the end, you know, got recognized and got a nice little award. These pins are really popular as well. This is, you know, little 911 pins or things like that, where supervisors or peers can give them out for recognition. It's just great. So just, you know, rewarding top performers, and peers sometimes identify them, and even those rewards are sometimes even better received by peers. And that's why that Tiny Pulse application that I mentioned in the beginning does so well, because it's kudos and cheers from peers. Well, thanks so much. Apologize again for going over today. I know there's a lot of great questions. We'll try to get those answered. We'll actually put them on a blog, so all your questions we'll answer kind of in a blog article format, and send you to link to those questions and answers. And on behalf of everyone at VPI, Avaya, and Avtec, we really appreciate your time, and we hope to see you, you know, either at one of these public safety events or a conference, or even, you know, at your agency sometime this year, and get to know you and help solve some of the challenges and issues you may be facing. So thanks so much, and have a wonderful afternoon.